Hey everyone, welcome back to the Balanced Lens, where we talk about faith, culture, and politics from a Christian worldview. Today, we're talking about a really explosive case that's dividing the nation, and frankly, it's every parent's worst nightmare. As I've been mulling over the details over this case the last few days, my heart as a parent has been broken, and yet this case is so divisive and so explosive all over the country. We've titled it The Track Me Tragedy inside the Carmelo Anthony murder case that divided America. A lot of details happened on this day back in 2025. Do you want to explain what happened?
Yes. So on April 2nd, 2025, there was heavy rain that delayed events at the district-wide track and field meet. This was happening at the David Kuykendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas, which is close to Dallas. It's about 30 minutes from Dallas. Carmelo Anthony, who was a student of Centennial High School, entered the Memorial High School team tent to shelter from the rain, which was totally fine. That was totally allowed. There was nothing wrong there. But then witnesses said that he was asked multiple times to leave the rival team's area, and then tension started rising. Anthony reportedly then challenged others with words like, touch me and see what happens. And at that same time, he reached back into his backpack. There was some pushing, some grabbing, and finally Anthony pulls up a knife and stabs Austin Metcalf once in the chest, and that was fatal. Metcalf later dies, and Anthony fled the scene but was arrested. He was then later asked by his, there was some staff over there, they asked, and Anthony pretty much told that he's the one who stabbed him. So that was not a question. Just as we think about what happened that day, I want to sprinkle in some background on this kid. Anthony was actually born in May 10th of 2007, which means he was 1 month away from turning 18. And he was 1 month away from walking for his graduation. He was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Carmelo was the oldest of 4 children. His family moved to the Frisco area from Louisiana around 2021, seeking for better opportunities, a safer environment, improved quality of life. The American dream, as we all know it. And he attended the Frisco Centennial High School, where he actually excelled academically. He had a 3.7 GPA and was the captain of both the football and the track teams. He also worked 2 part-time jobs, one at Foot Locker and one at the HEB supermarket, and he had no prior criminal record. So this is just a quick background on Carmelo Anthony. From his family perspective, his mother, her name is Kayla Haynes. She's a stay-at-home mom who was focused on her children, bringing them the right way. They regularly attended church. His father, Andrew Anthony, worked in auto sales as a general manager. And the family lived in a rental home at that time in an upscale community, right? It's the house is pretty upscale. I think the value is probably around $900,000. So the rent is probably around $3,500 or so. Generally speaking, if you look at the social media accounts, and the family statements, it portrays supportive, stable household, emphasizing children, athletics, education. There's no credible evidence or that indicate any prior trouble at home or any domestic issues, any instability. Of course, post everything that happened, there was a lot of harassment, a lot of issues happening, but the family itself seemed to be pretty stable. And so, as I understand it, Carmelo Anthony was he was around 5'11", I think. He was a safety, and Metcalf, he was a linebacker on another team, so he was about 200 pounds. I think Anthony was about 160 pounds, so there was a difference in their weight and Metcalf was about 6 feet tall. So a little taller and a little bulkier because he was like a linebacker built, but they were both said to have promising student athletes with a bright future ahead. And it began as a simple dispute and ended up in an irreversible tragedy.
Yeah, this is terrible, right? It's kids, you can call them borderline adults here. I don't know if you consider 18 as being an adult. Legally it is, but gosh, like you think about the dumb things you do as a kid, right? Now, the details of this day are important. Those details of what happened that day are really going to determine how the jury was influenced in their verdict, which we'll talk about later. Again, Anthony was asked to leave the tent about 15 times. When he wouldn't leave, Metcalf, according to the witnesses, pushed Anthony. Some of the students described it as a two-handed push, as they called it, quote unquote. Others said it was more of a one-handed push, a small shove. There was an altercation. This altercation lasted 4 to 6 minutes. Witnesses recalled Anthony saying, "Touch me and see what happens." I'm reiterating that because that's going to be a phrase the jurors are going to use in their verdict. Another witness quoted Metcalf as telling Anthony, "I'm not going to fight you." At some point thereafter, Anthony takes out this pocket knife, stabs Metcalf. Again, there's no video footage of this. This is all witness testimony, which makes this case even more challenging. After the stabbing, Anthony jogs away from the tent, and a coach who speaks to him on the track shortly testified afterward that Anthony said, quote unquote, "He put his hands on me and I stabbed him." So immediately he confessed, right? This is not about him confessing to killing Metcalf or not. He immediately confessed. That's not the point of why this has become so divisive. Now, he's been charged with murder from the beginning. The case has attracted significant media attention. Almost every celebrity athlete has been talking about this, not only because it involved a teenager killing another teenager at a high school track meet. There's a racial dimension. Anthony is black, Metcalf is white. So pretty quickly, the media jumped on this. They added this racial dimension online. Some people see this case as an example of unequal treatment in the justice system and questioned whether Carmelo Anthony was being treated fairly or unfairly and harshly because he was African American. Others see Metcalf as an innocent victim and feel that race was being used to distract them. Anthony had admitted to stabbing Metcalf. And so a lot of dimensions here, a lot of sadness through these details. These are two grieving families in the middle of this. But moving on to the actual trial, we think about this trial that happened almost a year later. We had a prosecution and defense representing the families. What were the arguments made by the prosecution and the defense? What was the ultimate verdict in all of this?
So from prosecution's perspective, I'll give you very high level. Anthony was, based on the evidence, the initial aggressor. He was considered the initial aggressor. He enters a space he did not belong. He issued a challenge and responded to a shove with deadly force by stabbing Metcalf in the chest. So this was intentional murder, not self-defense, because he had the opportunity to de-escalate or leave. This was the summary of the prosecution's case. From the defense perspective, they've argued that Anthony acted in reasonable fear for his safety after repeated demands to leave and physical confrontation by those in the tent. Because they say that Texas self-defense law allows force without a duty to retreat if lawfully present and threatened. They also argued this concept called sudden passion. It was like a sudden passionate urge to take his act with a pocket knife. So that was the defense claim. Just quickly, high level, let me give you the legal distinctions to think through based on the Texas Penal Code. So there is something called criminally negligent homicide, which is the lowest level. It has a sentence. If somebody's charged with that, you would get somewhere between half a year to 2 years sentence. And that basically is failure to perceive a substantial risk a reasonable person would see, which is not applicable here. The second one is manslaughter, which is recklessly causing death. Okay, they are aware of the risk, but consciously disregarding it. Right? So it's being reckless. It's recklessly causing death, but even when they're aware of what the risk is. Now, if that was a charge, it would be anywhere between 2 and 20 years. That would be the verdict. That would be the range of the verdict. But in this particular case, the state brought murder as a charge. And for murder, the way to think of murder is it's intentionally or knowingly causing death or intending serious bodily damage via an act clearly dangerous to human life. So it's either of the two. The clause 1 is intentionally or knowingly causing death, but the second one is intending serious bodily injury via an act clearly dangerous to human life. An example, a single stab to the chest, right? And this is what Anthony, like I said, was charged with. And under murder, you could get anywhere between 5 to 99 years or life in prison. So that's what he was charged with. So, and that was the range. This jury, they considered self-defense because that was argued, but they basically argued that, well, the defendant provoked the encounter. So he who provokes the encounter cannot claim self-defense. So that was their reasoning. And sudden passion they also rejected sudden passion as a reason why, because this was going on, like you mentioned, for 4 to 6 minutes. He had opportunity. There was no reason for at least from their perspective, that this would be classified under sudden passion, because he responded to a non-lethal provocation with a very lethal stab. So this is how they saw it. The verdict happened on June 9th of this year, 2026. And after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the Collin County, where the jury got together, they convicted Karmelo Anthony of murder and rejecting the self-defense and sudden passion claims. And the same jury sentenced Karmelo to 35 years in prison later the same day, and he's eligible for parole about halfway through, about 17 and a half years through his prison sentence. He's eligible for parole, but I know actively when he can get returned to the community with active monitoring. Just so our listeners know, an appeal has been filed, so this is not ended yet.
Yeah, excellent summary. And if you're going to understand the details of this case, this isn't about whether Carmelo Anthony killed someone. This is about what charge should he have properly or fairly received. And as you summarized, right, you have murder, you have the mitigation option with murder, which is sudden passion. There's manslaughter. There's also criminally negligent homicide. So if you're going to dig deep into this case, it's important to understand the distinctions between those charges and how they were used in this jury verdict. Now, this has fueled polarized debate. Some have questioned the verdict. Some have questioned the jury composition. Crowds have clashed outside the court this week. Comments have come across from figures all across the spectrum. I think over $500,000, probably more by now, has been raised for an appeal on the behalf of Carmelo Anthony. Metcalf's family has expressed profound loss. Now, what's interesting, figures like Cardi B, she's a rapper. She came out on X. She said that this outcome was disgusting and this was not justice. It was tried to make an example. She subsequently went on X and explained that this was extremely excessive for a teenager with no prior record. Now, what's interesting, I'm going to give you my take about whether this sentencing was fair. There are several cases we can look at that are very similar in the state of Texas. One is the case of Jason Allison versus Jose Luis Ramirez. This was an 18-year-old Jason Allison and Ramirez, both were 18. They had prior beef over a girl and something that happened at prom. They had planned or encountered each other for a fight in a school bathroom. Case and Allison brought a knife. Video showed Ramirez throwing the first punch, which is interesting here. Case and Allison pulls out the knife, stabs him multiple times. Case and Allison claims self-defense in a fight for his life in a school bathroom against this whole group. Now, the outcome, Case and Allison was not convicted of murder. He was convicted of criminally negligent homicide, sentenced to a maximum of 10 years in prison, vastly lower than the sentencing that Carmelo Anthony received of 35 years. Again, different charge, so this is not comparing apples to oranges, but again, 10 years, 35 years. Second case I want to bring up here is the case of Luis Alonso Alfaro versus Joshua Broussard. This was 2013, Spring High School in Spring, Texas. The details of the case are the following. 17-year-old Alfaro bumped into Broussard in a hallway. Again, these are kids, right? Like you do these dumb things in high school. Led to a group fight. Alfaro produced a knife and fatally stabbed Broussard. 3 others were wounded. The context of this was of a rivalry. Alfaro confessed to this. He was convicted of manslaughter, again, not murder, sentenced to 20 years. So my opinion is this: did Carmelo Anthony deserve to be sentenced? Absolutely. He killed someone. He was a young man who, I believe, in this moment, he lost self-control. He took another life. The tragedy of this case is that it's not a system that's rigged against him. It's not a racial battle against the white man. It's simply a horrible, irreversible mistake, one born from, poor decisions, heated teenage passions in this moment that has carried devastating consequences. Cases like this should move us towards sorrow for the entire situation. It's a promising life, just, cut short. Another one altered by incarceration. 2 families are, left to grieve in this situation. In my situation, my analysis, I think 35 years of sentencing is excessive. And for the reasons mentioned before, Carmelo Anthony had no criminal history, seemed to be a good kid, promising young man with no prior history, captain of 2 teams in his high school. 3.7 GPA, worked 2 jobs, came from a good family, seemed to have great parents. There was no clear video footage around this incident. A more proportionate punishment might fall into the 20-25 year range. I think that sounds more reasonable based on the precedent set by historical cases. Again, we're not, absolving him from anything wrong here. He did kill someone. He did something absolutely wrong. He should be punished. But looking at the precedent of cases, 35 years, even with the half-time parole, even with 17 years of parole, it sounds excessive. And so this is based on similar cases. This is based on his history. This is based on this fact that if he gets out of jail, I mean, when he's finally off parole, he'll be 52 years old for this mistake that he made in the heat of a moment. At the same time, you look at Metcalf's family, lowering the sentence to 10 or 15 years, as many are suggesting. In my opinion, it's profoundly unfair to this grieving family who lost their son at such a young age. A sentence that short would allow Anthony to potentially walk free in his early 30s with decades of life still around him, while Metcalf's life is tragically cut short. Again, not an easy thing to think through and prosecute. You have 2 young lives, one life taken, one life that's going to be incarcerated. And so, how do we administer justice in this situation? Any thoughts? Do you think this was a fair verdict?
So it's important, right, as we think through this, to look at both sides and appreciate the why they land where they land, right? So from the arguments for fairness, you have a jury that heard all the sides and they found murder. It was a single chest stab that was deadly, right? There were 35 years. So remember, the range is 5 to 99, and they picked 35, right? Which is kind of the midpoint ish. And he's actually eligible after 7.5 years for parole. So the argument is like, so this sentencing gives that accountability without maximum life as a penalty. So that's one side. The other side talks about like, okay, he's just a teenager making a dumb mistake and had a clean record. Like, he had a clean record, a hardworking person, 3.7 GPA, played sports and excelled at it. Captain of both the track team as well as the football teams, right? Worked 2 part-time jobs. So like, so that is the other side. Like, really, like, can we not be a little lenient given the background of this case? This is the tricky part here, if you ask me. Is like, I think one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, how do we think about sentencing? Like, what is our ultimate goal when we think through serving justice, right? What is justice? Like, so if I take a tangential path to the Bible, in the Old Testament, God talks about this concept of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that concept, right? And in cases where somebody killed somebody else, a human life was taken intentionally, meaning premeditated, the rule was a life for a life, right? If you kill somebody intentionally, your life will be taken. However, if it was manslaughter, accidental, and it gives an example, right? I'm raising my axe to cut down a tree, the head comes off, goes and hits somebody, and he dies. That's manslaughter. As an example of manslaughter. The rule there was still there was a consequence. He would go and live in isolation, in exile, to a city that is predetermined until the serving high priest died. I don't know when the person dies. Maybe in 5 years, maybe 25 years, maybe 35 years. I have no idea. So there was this range, right? So I'm just giving you the biblical perspective of what that variation was. Given the family background I described for Karmelo and his own personal record of what we know, I feel like when we think through justice, we have to think, what are we trying to ultimately accomplish? Are we trying to redeem this person who may or may not have done, who has done a crime, who has done something wrong? You want to teach them a lesson, but you don't want to crush them. You don't want to completely devastate them, right? So that's a question. Like, is it punitive? Is the justice meant to be purely punitive? It's like, yes, you get what you deserve, right? That's what you deserve. Or is it meant to be redemptive? Okay, there is some consequence that you're going to pay for, but ultimately, I want to redeem you. I want you back into the fold of society. I want you to be a productive member of society. And it's a very fine balance. It's a very fine balance that people struggle with. So And I appreciate, but I think that's a question that we have to ask through our judicial system. I've heard elsewhere that we have, like, just from an incarceration perspective, we have a lot more people in jails than most of the Western society or something per capita. So it's probably time to like have a deeper look into our judicial system and think through like what type of judicial system do we want to enact. Of course, we do not want to encourage these type of crimes, but if you think about it, right, it's a foolish decision made by a teenager in the heat of the moment. If we are honest, when we were teenagers, there are a lot of dumb decisions that were just around the corner. We just happened not to make it, but and we are here, right? So I feel very empathetic to that. So given the background of this, I would say yes, the sentencing should have been much lower because your goal is to redeem this person. It doesn't seem like Carmelo Anthony is somebody who is ill in any way, like he has any mental issues. He doesn't seem like he's a psychopath. He seems like a stable kid from a stable family who just made a dumb decision, a fatal decision, but a dumb decision nevertheless, in the heat of the moment. And I'd rather have seen something in the maybe 5 to 10 year range than what is now put on him. Just it's my like it is still a loss for the grieving family. I'm pretty sure Carmelo is filled with guilt and grief, and he'll carry it for the rest of his life. I'm sure his family is going to carry that guilt and shame because, again, that's the type of people they seem to be. And if that's the case, then there's no need to excessively pile on coal on top of their heads and crush them.
Yeah, it's challenging to think about, especially if you replace the name of Austin Metcalf with your own son or own daughter. What would you want for justice for the other teenager involved? And how do you fairly announce a verdict that will deter the crime, allow for redemptive justice, as you mentioned, and yet be fair in how this punishment is executed? Now, a lot of people in the media have come out and said, well, this was a jury that was unfair because there were no black jurors. In fact, they've gone on to say that this was an all white jury. Is that true? And what do you think about this concept of having a jury of your own peers that is representative of your own race?
It's a very misunderstood concept, jury of your own peers. I think a lot of people think about that as like, if I commit a crime, I'm an American Indian, so my jury should be all American Indians. And that's not the intent at all. So under the Sixth Amendment, having a jury of your peers, which is all right, it means to have an impartial jury that is drawn from a fair cross section of the community in this jurisdiction that it happened, and not a literal demographic mirror, because at what point do you stop it, right? Is it race, age, education background? At what point do you stop mirroring it? But that is never the intent. The goal is to have fairness and prevent the elites, the governments, the ruling class from being the one who judges me, right? Somebody who is like me in my community, who understands the day-to-day struggles of life, right? That's what it means to have a jury of peers. And so in this case, right, there was a large pool of 500 to 600 potential participants. The final 12 plus the 6 alternates included no black members of that community. So even though the Collin County black population is somewhere between 9 and 12%, in the final tally, there was no black. So that's why people are saying that there's a bias. But prosecutors basically use their strikes on qualified black prospects it was race neutral reasons. For example, a lot of them were educators and people, and the argument was like they couldn't fairly be a juror and be impartial in their trial. There were people who outrightly said that they couldn't in good faith convict a black person. Like there were people so these are all used. It's not like a simple process. It's a very thorough process that happens today, and people are disqualified if they don't show that they can be impartial in their judgment. The panel had diversity, by the way. The majority of the panel was actually women, not men, and there were some Hispanics, there were some Asian, both Indians, Chinese, etc. The Asian. So it was a diverse group of people, just happened to not be black people. But remember, the black people were represented as witnesses. So there were witnesses who actually argued against Carmelo Anthony as well. So it's not like you can't just throw unfairness as the reason why all this happened. I think this is the way to think about it in a way you said it. So it starts off when the case is charged. Do you try the person as a minor or as an adult? That starts stemming the how it ends up. The second thing is, what is the charge? Is it voluntary? Is it manslaughter, or is it negligent manslaughter, or are you talking murder? That changes your how you get charged and what the verdict becomes. So those are more important elements of the case than honing in on yeah, there must have been like a racial bias to why the verdict was what it was.
Yeah, a lot of people are using that point to say that because there were no African Americans on the jury, it's an unfair trial just by the very essence of that. But a jury of your own peers, as you mentioned, right, it does not mean a jury that's racially similar to the defendant. The idea is historically and legally fellow citizens in your community, not literally social, economic, or racially equal. The core requirements, as you mentioned, are impartiality, a fair cross section of the community. In fact, some key Supreme Court principles, number one, are a fair cross section of the community. Right, jurors should represent the broader demographic of the community. However, the final seated jury does not have to be demographically proportionate. If it were, we would have a mathematical nightmare. Like, imagine every court case. Like, if you're, I don't know, you're Hungarian, right? And you're like in an all black city, like, how do you find, five Hungarian jurors or three Europeans, that understand Hungarian culture? Like, it creates this challenging problem. So, a key Supreme Court principle has been fair cross section, no racial exclusion, right, based on a person's background. Now, an interesting aspect of this, as this case is appealed, Anthony's attorneys will likely raise the Batson issue. A Batson challenge is a legal objection raised during jury selection or voir dire, where they believe the opposing party is using these peremptory challenges to exclude potential jurors based on race or ethnicity or sex or other protected characteristics. A peremptory challenge is the right of a prosecutor or defense attorney to dismiss a potential juror without any given reason. And so this Batson challenge says, well, I think you did. I think you dismissed a juror based on race. And so this would likely be an appeal that Anthony's attorneys bring up in their appeal process. So if this case is not done, it'll likely go to an appeals court, and we'll see what develops from this. Now, as a Christian, as a believer, even if you're a parent and you're not a Christian, this case should grieve your heart. I mean, it's horrible, right? You raise a kid, you send him to school for sports, and one comes back and, in a police car, the other doesn't come back. As a Christian, and how, as a believer, should we react to this? How should we react to someone with an opposing view in a topic that is so racially polarizing?
This is very important for people who are like Christians. So this is a terrible loss, right? It's a loss for both families. You have one family grieving the loss of a son that is no more with them, and you've got another family who's grieving the loss of someone who they raised and now he's going to be in jail. They made a move for better opportunities to this place, and now he's not going to be able to enjoy it. And this is going to affect his siblings as well. This is going to affect them. We have heard about people who have been surrounding them and pestering them and writing all kinds of stuff against them. How are they going to live a normal life anymore? We have to, as Christians, we have to be able to be empathetic. And the reason why that's important is like God's character is like what we are trying to reflect as a Christian is the heart of Christ, which is the heart of God, which is a balance of justice and mercy. If it were not for God's mercy in our lives, we were doomed. Because the Bible says, for while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Not after we were redeemed, while we were yet sinners. And it talks about mourning with people who mourn, right? It talks about showing mercy, delivering justice but being merciful, about guarding our hearts against hatred or vengeance, right? It talks about that in Romans. So this is very challenging. I'm not saying it's easy, but what you need to do is before we jump into conclusions, try to understand things from the perspective of what Carmelo Anthony's family is going through, what his mother, what his father, how they lived, how they sacrificed, what his siblings are suffering right now, the situation they are in. This kid who made a mistake, absolutely. A fatal mistake that he made. It is true. How is he going to be when he comes back to society? What type of person are we getting back? Is he going to be completely broken and completely to a point where he's just going to, I don't know, end up being a drug addict and drink and just die? Is that the end? And think about also of Metcalf's family, right? Like how they are grieving. They have lost somebody who's never going to come back. And it's sad, right? So it comes back to the question, I think, in the center of the Christian faith, which is the cross signifies the how God balanced out justice and mercy, right? It shows that while our command is to love God above all and to love our neighbor as ourselves, everyone. It talks about praying for those who persecute us. It talks about loving our enemy, those who don't like us, those who disagree with us. The Bible talks about us showing love and empathy, right? And the patience to listen to people. That's how you conquer. You conquer the world not by trying to beat evil, by doing more evil. So I come back to the question, as a Christian, we definitely have to have that balance in how we empathetically deal with the situation. First of all, the first thing to do is stop jumping to conclusions. Don't listen to any side and jump. Try to get a pure, unbiased view of what is happening. Go and dig into the family, understand the facts. That's not just for Christians, for non-Christians, everybody. Understand the facts first, and then react to something. But overall, I think my conclusion from my research on this case is we should probably look at what type of judiciary and what type of judicial system we need. Do we want it to, how punitive do we want it to be versus how redemptive do you want it to be? Like in a way, like Metcalf's life, it's lost and it's gone, right? I mean, it's unfortunate that it's gone. The question is, do we destroy the Anthony's life who's remaining as revenge, or do we let him pay his consequences, punish him, but not destroy him? This is a question that we have to answer as a broader country and a judiciary. What is our goal when we punish people? And I would say that when you think through it, draw a parallel between that and how you punish your children when they do something wrong. Do you do it to crush them so they will like you beat them up so they will never get up again, so that their willpower is completely destroyed? Is that your goal in punishment? Or is your goal for them to just know that there is consequence for your action, but I want you to still thrive and grow? I don't want to destroy you. I want to see what's best for you. Is that the ultimate goal when we think about our judicial system? Is the ultimate goal to redeem a person, bring them back to society, get them to change, right? And be a very productive person, to change behavior. Is that the goal? To change the heart and behavior of the person, the person who is being punished, or is it to crush them? This is something that you have to always ask yourself. And the more you are self-aware and thinking through these very deeper things that are not easy, that causes conflict and strife within you, the better you are as a person to have a more balanced view in society.
Yeah, excellent points. I'm going to make 4 points as a Christian and how this case has affected me. Number one, self-reflection should lead us to grace. If you reflect on your own life as a teenager, we have done an abundance of stupid things, especially me. I was a kid who knew how to get away with a lot, but I did a lot of bad things. I was counting on my fingers during this podcast about how many fights or violent altercations did I have, right? And it's between 5 and 10. One of them in which I literally tried to burn down someone's house. Listen, as a kid, as a teenager, you're not thinking. Your mind is not fully developed, right? Carmelo Anthony could have been any one of us in the moment, plunging that knife into someone. As someone who's been in fistfights, you're not thinking about like minimal impact. Like, how can I hit him gently so that he walks away standing, cries, but doesn't, go home and kill himself? Like, you're not thinking about this. You're like, I just want to kill the other person, right? And I'm not minimizing the grief of this family, but self-reflection, it should lead us to grace and to realize all of us are capable of doing the exact same thing. Secondly, that should lead us to compassion. and compassion over criticism. It's so easy to indulge in the political left versus right argument. It's so easy to get caught up in this black versus white racial issue. Should you have a firm stance? Absolutely. But you should allow compassion to be the filter through which you see the world. First Peter 3, verse 8 in the Bible says this: all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous. There are people on the different sides of this issue, absolutely. But compassion should be what causes you to listen and understand to someone else's perspective, especially in this situation where it's just a horrible situation for two families. Thirdly, there's this beautiful story of redemption. You look at Carmelo Anthony's life or even Austin Metcalf's life, and you ask, can God still do anything with the legacy of Austin Metcalf or the life of Carmelo Anthony? Absolutely. You look at the greatest saints that God used. Look at King David, who God calls a man after his own heart. King David loved this woman, or lusted after this woman, Bathsheba, so much that he had her husband Uriah killed in battle. King David, the man who God calls a man after his own heart, was a murderer. The Apostle Paul gave consent to the killing of Christians in the New Testament. God used him to pen most of the New Testament. But God uses people that are flawed, that are broken, that are even murderers. And so there's hope in the Carmelo Anthony story here. Fourthly, you should ask yourself, what can I do to improve the safety and security of my neighborhood? What can I do to use the gifts that God has given me to serve? You may not realize this, but there is a scarcity of men that volunteer in churches, a scarcity of men that volunteer in schools. There is an epidemic of bullying and fighting and all kinds of drama at schools. Now, most people will say, well, we need to send more staff into schools and we need to send more money or we need more counselors. All this requires a ton of money. All this requires a ton of red tape. But you need to ask yourself, what am I doing as a human being to support my local school, to be there at an after school track meet, maybe encouraging kids on the way home, maybe coming into classrooms and reading with kids? There are many kids that come from broken families. There are many kids that in the heat of a moment could use the guidance of a elder man or an elder woman standing by the side, encouraging them to de-escalate and do the right thing. And so before you point your finger at the school system or the government or whatever party you want to point it to yourself and ask, what am I actually doing to serve the people in my own community? And so this is a divisive topic that is not going away. Again, I mentioned there's an appeals process, and so more details will be to follow. But what do you think? We encourage you to drop a comment in our episode. Do you think the verdict is fair? Do you think the jury composition was fair? What other thoughts do you have about this case? We'd love to hear them. Until our next episode, thank you for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks, everyone.